record on this computer. Okay, we're recording now. Okay, so so this week we're going to create a new Rails app, which a lot of what we did last week on Wednesday. He sort of, and he's following a similar path. Generally, when you're learning Rails, Greg, it's similar to what we did on Wednesday, where you'll create a new app, and then we just created a controller and an action. Right. So a lot of this will be a review of what we did on Wednesday, but it'll be good to sort of number one, it's good to just for me, it's good to see someone else do it too, just to see if they, if it's sort of in line with what I'm thinking. Which, yeah, for the most part, I think everything he did is sort of generally how I teach things too. So I've not yet created the app he did. So I'm gonna I made notes. I'm gonna create the so I'm gonna go into my sandbox. I'm gonna create the app. So again, we talked about this last week. I'm gonna do Rails new and then simple CMS is what we're going to be building, and then we do -d and then Postgres. I think that's right. We'll see if it is. So again, just anytime you're creating a new Rails app, Rails new, the name of the app, and you can do that by itself. In this case, we're going to pass this -d in. -d is for database, and there are a bunch of different options out there. To be honest, I don't know what all the options are, but I know there's MySQL, Postgres, but I think you can do Mongo DB. I think there's Couch DB. I think there's many options that you can choose. So yeah, it just depends on if you're and that's an interesting sidebar conversation, is the role of no SQL versus traditional relational databases. And it's interesting, I think the tide is starting to turn. I was just reading a article recently that people, the NoSQL thing, it's not played out by any means. There's still plenty of NoSQL out there, but I think people are getting more sophisticated about when they choose that. There's not really a substitute for a good relational database. So again, think MySQL, Postgres versus NoSQL. And so it really depends. You need to be, it depends on the situation exactly, the kind of work you're trying to do. And also speed and scalability and things like that. Particular article I was reading that I hadn't really thought about was from a scalability standpoint, that NoSQL, that databases scale much better than relational databases do. But to which I respond that Facebook is built on MySQL, so I think most people would say it scales pretty damn good. So
yeah, pretty good there. Yeah.
But anyway, so we're going to use Postgres in this case. So I've got Rails new simple CMS -d Postgres. So that's saying, hey, give me a new Rails app named simple CMS, and I want to use the Postgres database. So I'm going to hit return, and we're going to go through some gyrations. So I did that wrong. And in fact, this was nice, and I thought I was probably spelling that wrong. So it's actually PostgreSQL, but we can also see these are all the options here, right? These are all the supported databases. So MySQL, Postgres, SQLite, Oracle, Frontbase, IBM DB, SQL, on and on and on. Now, I don't see any NoSQL options there, so I don't think I'm lying about that. So it may be, there may be some other hoops you need to jump through. I mean, I know you can use Rails with NoSQL. I guess it's possible you can't generate. That may be something you have to do after a Rails app is created. It's possible that the generator doesn't allow you to do that. I thought that was an option, but that may not be the case. So, okay, so let's correct what I did. So I'm just going to copy this, and I'm going to put PostgreSQL there. Okay, so that's going to give me a new Rails app, and I guess when I initially created it, it gave me, it must have created, see, I kind of don't like this. So let me try this again. I want to remove. So when I initially ran that command, it must have created the simple CMS folder. So I'm going to remove, and then this do /rf to make sure it blows everything away. Okay, and let's try that again. Okay, there we go. I mean, just so you know, Rails is smart enough to know that if you've already got a folder there with a Rails app, you try to create a new Rails app on top of it, it will go in and recreate the app, and then it'll ask you, not quite file by file, but I think based certain files that'll go in and ask if you want to keep that existing file or create a new one, that kind of thing. But anyway, we're going to create a Rails app from scratch here. So while that's churning, we'll look at the basic structure of a Rails app. Again, a lot of this we did last week. Although this was a chance for me. I mean, we talked, I think we talked about a good bit of this, but just watching this video, he highlighted a couple things I think that I didn't. So inside the apps folder, again, the majority of your time when you're working in Rails is going to be spent inside the app folder, and specifically the models, views, and controllers folders. I've got a ping in Slack here from work. Let me check that out real quick. Okay. So yeah, the model view and controllers folders are generally where you spend most of your time. So he also highlighted the helpers folder, the assets folder, and the JavaScript folder. Helpers are generally related to views. Those are sort of special methods or code that methods or codes that just allow you to do sort of special things inside your app. And so lots of times, rather than creating a separate method or a separate class inside the models or the controllers folders, you can create helpers that will allow you to take care of those things. The JavaScript folder is the other piece too. That's sort of evolved over time, and just even the last 10 years since I've been using Rails, I've seen that evolve. JavaScript used to be part of the assets folder. Assets are generally things like CSS files, style sheets. I think the idea is when we think of like not external necessarily to the app, but sort of extraneous things, those things would go inside the assets folder. But about 5 years ago, I think with Rails 5, the JavaScript files that were previously part of the assets folder were moved into their own folder called JavaScript, and obviously that was just that was a result of JavaScript just becoming more popular over time. So it made sense to abstract that out into its own folder. Let's see, is my app still going?
So an image file then sounds like it would be inside of an assets folder.
Yeah. So and in fact, if you've got your look, mine just finally went. Maybe we can actually look at it. I was gonna say, if you've got your app up inside your ID, I think there's an images folder inside your assets folder. And so Rails has conventions for all those things where it looks for certain things, and it looks like my app's done. So let me go into Simple CMS, and then let me open this up. So let's see, app assets, and yeah, we've got an images folder there.
Yeah,
so yeah, and right, so generally, yeah, you'll put images inside of the images full folder, but really depends on your app. Like for instance, we maintain an app. One of our larger apps that we use, images is a large part of what it does. Clients are able to upload images and manage those. So we've got an entirely separate structure for the image folders rather than dropping them here. Again, like a lot of the things in Rails, they sort of give you they've got a convention for where things go, but depending on the needs of your app and what it's doing, then you may want to put things in different locations. Let's see, we talked about helpers. So then also the JavaScript folder. So again, the assets folder is here. We'll talk about config some. Style sheets is inside there. The application.css is sort of the default CSS file. Again, as your apps grow and the needs grow, Generally, more sophisticated applications are going to have multiple style sheets that are going to be pulling from. So that's just a way for you to sort of abstract out logic and functionality. So you've got multiple files here. By default, if you want, you can just drop everything inside your application.css folder, but obviously that starts to become unwieldy at some point. So it just makes sense to break things out into various files. And then the JavaScript folder. So generally, so you've got the application.js is sort of the default location for any JavaScript you've got. But again, and we'll look at if we wanted to add React, let's say, to our app. Again, there's a React gem, and there's a couple different ways to do it, but generally you might drop that inside. You might put those files and put the references to those files inside the JavaScript folder. So let's see, I've got a note in Slack here. Let me respond to it real quick. Okay, config folder. So there's a config folder inside the assets folder, but the config folder they're referring to is this config folder at the root of the app. So you'll spend a fair amount of time here. It's not something you're like in there on a daily basis, but when you think about the sort of guts or wiring or underpinning of your app, the config folder is where a lot of that takes place. The database.yaml file is key. So if we open that up and look, notice we see Postgres here. Again, that -db option that we would use to configure our database is where that is configured at. If you look at the app we created last week when we were just playing around, I think we might have used SQLite for that. If you go into the database.yaml file there and look, you'll see SQLite sort of set up there. Notice there's also development and test environments. You've got a sort of separate configuration for each one of those things, and that makes sense, right? If you're on your local machine doing development work, you're going to have a particular username and password for that local database that's on your system. Your production environment is most likely going to have a different configuration there. So that this default section is going to be your production environment, and then of course your development and tests are going to have their own environments too. And then there's also a production section here at the bottom. Postgres does this thing. If you'll notice, there's not an explicit username and password here, and I've never really been able to wrap my brain around exactly how this works. But I think Postgres uses the login name like that you use to actually log in to your local system. That's the default user that it uses, and as long as Postgres is configured a certain way, it'll use those credentials by default. So it's nice that most of the time it just works. When it breaks, it's a pain in the butt to figure out why it doesn't work, which I've had happen before. And in fact, we'll see if I actually run this app. In fact, that's actually will be a good test. So I'm going to do bundle just to make sure everything's okay there. And if I do Rails S, and then if I load, and then what I'm testing here is that my connection to the database is going to be okay. I'm not failing. In fact, yeah, here we go. See, well, I haven't actually raked anything yet. So let's do Rails. I think I need to do create first. If you'll notice in the video, he explicitly goes into MySQL. I think he manually creates his database and his users there. So that's why we're not doing any of that here. And I think that's sort of, again, I think that's that sort of special relationship that Rails has with Postgres as opposed to MySQL, that you don't have to do any of those things. So I've created the database. Now I shouldn't need to migrate because we haven't actually created any migration files. So let me just, I'm curious to run the server again. And let's see if this runs. Okay, yeah, so that runs now. So yeah, again, notice I didn't have to, you know, my database.yaml doesn't have any username and password in it, but it just sort of worked out of the box. So again, I think that's that special relationship that Rails has with Postgres over MySQL. I think if you do it with MySQL, you have to be explicit about a lot of those things. Okay, so that's config DB folder we've looked at. Public folder, he spent some time on that in the videos. So the public folders are public. I think we'll do an experiment later where you can manually create an HTML file here, and you'll get these. In fact, I mean, these are public files. So for instance, if I go ahead and start the server back up. I mean, I think these are routes that are in place. I think if I just go /404, will that load? Should be a way for those to load. I wonder if I have to put public in here. No. So I thought we could, like I say, we'll work through that later. I think we should be able to drop a file and put an HTML file in that public folder, and then go right to the route. I'm sort of feeling like I'm either missing something on the route. The path I'm using up here is not quite right, or maybe we have to go and add something to the routes file, but we'll come back and look at that. But anyway, anything in the public folder is you should consider that public. So if you drop any images, HTML files, anything like that, it can be loaded by default from the public folder. Robots.txt file is here also. Note that, you know, Google and other search engines use the robots.txt file for how they're going to index your website. Log folder is here. Let's take a peek at that real quick. So your development.log is here. Every request and response cycle that Rails goes through, anytime somebody hits your website, it's logged to these log files. In this case, on the development side, it's here. And in fact, you can see here, I said started full, you know, the request that I made to get this public 404 page. And then of course, you know, I got the error response back. So any kind of public. And so let's see, it's probably from the bottom. I was looking for the default route. So I think when you just go to the just localhost through 3000, nothing gets logged, or at least I'm not. Well, here it is here. Yeah. So this is our / that, and you can see it. I got a valid, yeah, I got a valid response back there. But then, so any request that's made, any request that request response cycle is logged here on your production server. Obviously, it's in the production.log file there, and those are rotated. I think Rails has got a you know, Rails has got a convention in place to sort of rotate that so that they don't grow out of control. But yeah, but just know that all that stuff is logged in this log folder. And then the gem file, we talked about that some last week. Again, your gem file is sort of the you know, gives you an idea of what version of Rails you're running, possibly what version of Ruby you're running. I'm not sure if that's default now or not. It's there. I'm seeing it here. So at least I don't know if that's a configuration option specifically I've got on my machine, but version of Ruby, version of Rails, and then any other gems and those gem versions that are running. And then I'll also mention again the gemfile.lock, which is the sort of more sophisticated or the more detailed version of the gem file. Questions on any of that? Okay.
No, thanks.
Okay. Configure your Rails app. Application.rb file. That is an app config, I think, an application.rb. So this is, by default, this is pretty, there's not a whole lot going on here, but just know that this is where you may go in and modify this either once you add other more sophisticated gems, or if there's other sort of different options you have, you can go into this application.rb file and change these. You'll hear the term sensible defaults used a lot, and usually for these files, these sort of baseline configuration files, you've got sensible defaults set, and then of course you can go in and modify those based on the needs of your application. Initializers, we'll go in here. So again, these are sort of we've got a sort of clean default Rails app. So these are all the initializers that are there by default. Often gems will have their own initializer file. Then they'll create that here. For instance, for authentication, you'll often use devise. The devise gem, devise has its own initializer file. It'll normally go here. And again, these are just sort of system level defaults that you might want for either the Rails application overall, or again, if it's for an initializer for a specific gem file, there may be some defaults for that gem you would set inside this initializer file. Let's see, environments. So again, your development, production, and test environments are going to be configured here. Again, it's sort of outside the scope of what we're talking about to sort of dig too deep, but things like the log files, if you wanted to change where the log files were being saved, you can do that kind of stuff. Maybe there's internationalization you're doing where you're changing languages or something like base level system type things. You can do those things inside this environments.rb file. Test, if there's a specific testing framework that you're going to use. Rails has its own sort of vanilla testing framework that it uses, but if there's another test framework you're going to be using, those are the kind of things you would configure inside the specific environment file.
Are there any like big gotchas when I'm poking around in this environments folder?
Generally don't touch it unless you know what, you should know what you're doing. I wouldn't go in and experiment. Generally.
That's what I figured you were going to say.
Yeah, it's one of those things, even as a Rails dev, you don't often touch these. Again, if it's a special case kind of things. Again, this idea of sensible defaults that Rails gives you, most of the time, those are sufficient. Now, again, it depends on how sophisticated your app is. Something like GitHub, if you go in and look at these system level files for Rails apps that GitHub might use, they're probably going to look very different than what the system defaults do. Whereas the stuff we're going to build, and even the production code that we might write for Vets Who Code, will probably 99% of it we'll stick with whatever the Rails defaults are. So, that's
it's my experience that as a new Rails guy, I go Google some error and Stack Overflow sends me off on some rabbit trail, and I think it sounds to me like the environments folder, when Stack Overflow is telling me to go in here and start changing things, I probably ought to just look for a different answer.
Well, not necessarily. I was going to say that's usually the only time I will change that is if I'm having an issue, and then I find, the answer is I need to go touch this. Now, obviously, I need to think about, look at the number of upvotes that it has and that kind of thing.
Sure.
But that's generally when I do is when, okay, I find some other resource that tells me this is what I need to go change. Or again, if it's the documentation of a specific gem, if I'm using a gem and I'm having an issue with that,
Yeah,
and
that's a
okay,
good point. Okay.
the documentation of that gem says, okay, yeah, go in the environments slash production.rb file and change this setting, then that's normally when I'll go touch that.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah. Okay, let's see, initializers, environments, and then database.yaml. I think we've talked about that. Okay, so the next step they had us do, we created a new Rails app. Is we generated a controller, and again, this is similar to what we talked about last week, so this would be a good review for us. But again, the convention for creating a controller is going to be Rails G, and then it's the controller name, and then the action, any action you want to add to that controller. So in this case, we did, let's see, Rails G controller, demo, and index. So I'm doing Rails G controller, demo, and then index. So again, this says, hey, Rails, I want to generate a new controller. The controller's name is going to be demo, and then I'm going to create an index action associated with that. And just for kicks, I think you can pass multiple arguments in here. I'm going to say index and blarg, and I think this should create two actions within the demo controller. Let's see if it does. Okay, so yeah, we go here, and then the Rails tells us exactly what it did. It created a demo controller for us. It created a route for us. We'll look at that more. It created two views. It created a demo folder, and then it created both our index view and our blarg view. It did some test stuff for us. And then, yeah, that's it. So let's look at our demo controller to start. So let me close up some of this. So we'll go to apps, controllers, and then here's our demo controller. And then notice it gave us a
Oh yeah, there's your blarg.
Index action and a blarg action, right? And then if we go to our views, notice it gave us, inside our demo. So we've got a single demo folder that corresponds to our demo controller. And then it gave us our two views, one each for the two actions that we had. So hope you can start to see how it puts things together. Now, again, this is not, as you get more into more sophisticated apps, some of this is going to change, but generally, again, if you stick within this idea of convention over configuration, if you sort of stay within that framework, you can get an awful lot done. And there's advantages. One of the things I like to preach is there's advantages to sticking to the Rails way of doing things. You can do things other ways if you want, but it's nice, again, when you bring someone else in or bring on a new team member or pass this application on to someone else, there's not anything real sophisticated going on that they need to figure out outside of the Rails paradigm. Okay, so we did that. Change text inside the Zoom. So let's see. Let's actually run our server and do a couple things.
Yeah, your convention over configuration. I'm a fan of, like, if it works, there ain't no reason for me to go break it.
Yeah, right? I mean that's the idea. And if you want to get that sophisticated, then contribute to Rails, contribute to the underlying project, and make it a part of Rails rather than sort of rolling your own.
Yeah.
So, all right. So if we want to get to those views, again, we're going to follow our route. So in this case, it was demo. And so by default, demo is not going to do anything. We have to tell it not only the controller, so that the convention for the URL here is /controller / action. So in this case, we can do index, and we should get our index view. And then we also had a blog action that we created, and there was also an associated view with that. So we can look at that, and we can see the difference in text. Yep. So we know we're getting that different. Now, what does our routes.rb file say? Now, I don't know. I don't think it added. I think it added a general route. The video, I think they called it a simple route for both, but I don't know if there's going to be two separate routes. Okay, there is. So we actually had two separate where they created a specific route for each action here. And yeah, you sort of need. I think there's a catch-all route that you could do that would maybe get both of these by default, but I think the sort of default way to write the routes out, they were explicit about each of the actions that we've got. Okay. 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 So here's, getting back to our public. So remember we mentioned our public folder and everything in the public view. Everything in the public folder is viewable. So one of the tests they did in the video is creating a static.html file in the public folder and then /static. So that's, I want to see if that works. So let's go, you can try this on your end if you like to. So I'm gonna go to the public folder here, and I'm gonna create just gonna say this is a test, and then I'm gonna save it. So we're gonna call this static.html, and then if I go to our server here, okay, yeah, that did load. So I'm curious why the 404 file didn't load, like are these other files, because again, they're just files, right? 442. Yeah, I don't really understand why we're getting a routing error there. I don't know if those are special files or what, but anyway, we saw that by creating this static HTML file, we can just put static here. So just know that's just something to sort of keep in the back of my. I mean, generally you're not just going to drop files in the public folder like this. I mean, they're probably going to be associated with controllers or other work that you're doing. I mean, we'll see where we go with this CMS, the simple CMS that we're creating. I'll be curious to see if, I mean, it's content management system, so hopefully maybe we'll be able to add images. So we'll see where we store those. I mean, it's possible they'll just be dropped inside the public folder, but there's, I mean, in my mind, I think about there's security issues with that, and it just doesn't seem
right. Yeah.
It doesn't seem a very structured way to do it, but again, we'll see where we go. And the nice thing is maybe we can modify that if he does. Let's say he is dropping all of his images in the public folder. Maybe that'll be an opportunity for us to improve what he's written there. But okay, so that's just a test to just again to show you we created an HTML file inside here, and like I think we should be able to load these. Let me let me do this. Let me just copy this file name. Curious to see if this will load for us. .png. I'm not seeing the image unless it's, let's I want to put my own image in there. I'm just curious to see. Surely I've got something out here. Okay, I got a Chevy image actually. Yeah, let's do. So I'm going to copy from the desktop Chevy.png, and I'm going to copy that to asset no public Rails S. All right, so I put a Chevy image here, which I use for my El Camino. And let's see if Chevy will load. Yeah. So again, just the point is there that anything you drop inside the public folder, you can automatically route to it via the URL. And in fact, I've sort of cheated and done that before, where I had some files I wanted to make publicly, like some MP3s or something. I can't remember what it was I was doing, but I had a Rails app somewhere that had a whole other purpose. And I mean, that this was on a personal Rails app that I was running. I just dropped the files inside the public folder, and it's sort of a hidden. The website wasn't being indexed, so I mean there was some obscurity there from a standpoint of just the only way you could get to the files, you'd have to know the name of the file and the server to be able to get to it.
Yeah,
So
okay. Yep.
But just again, the point is there, anything you drop inside the public folder is accessible via the web server. Okay, so we have updated our image a little bit here. If you remember previously, we were looking at our MVC architecture, and I actually added the routes.rb. We sort of had that conversation, and I'll review this. Yeah. So I'll review this real quick, and then we'll go look at the other one. But again, browser makes a request to our Rails app. First thing that actually happens is it goes to that routes.rb file, make sure I have a valid route that it can actually serve up a valid response to. And assuming it does, then we go on to the controller. The controller may or may not speak to the model, depending on if it needs to make a database call or not. And then that's passed on to the view, and then the view actually makes the response back to the browser or to the client. So we've got a little updated view of that here. Again, browser. So in this case, browser is talking to our web server. So again, this is the same route, the same process we were talking about before. We've just added a little more detail to it. So technically, again, what's happening here is browser makes a request to our web server, and again, we can see that in our web console here. Let me refresh that, and so that's interesting. So apparently those requests are not logged to the server, because again, I'm hitting chevy.png and I'm not getting anything. But if I go to demo blarg, so notice this is logged. So I don't know why that is. I'd have to dig deeper into that.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yep.
Yeah. But anyway, again, this is our, we've got a valid route. This is our routes.rb file. So first the request is actually made to the web server. The web server has to have the ability to receive a request to start with. At that point, we check our routes.rb file to see if we've got a valid route. In this case, demo blarg is a valid route. So so notice here our public eye, and in fact, this is the answer to our question on why our Chevy image is not being logged in the console. So again, this is this convention over configuration thing, right? Rails has its own way of doing things. In this case, a request is made to the web server. The public folder is checked first, and if a file or a request, or I guess if a file is found there, then the response is immediately made back. The routing controller, other parts of the Rails framework never even comes into play. That request is immediately fulfilled without Rails ever coming in. The web server, I think the right way to think about it is the web server is handling this request completely by itself. Rails is never actually in the picture here. So that's why, to answer our question about, again, if we're loading this image directly from the public folder, we don't see any kind of response or any logging here. But again, if we make this request, we do see that. We do see that because, again, in our image here, we're going browser, web servers, making the request. In this case, /demo/blarg is not found in the public folder. So now we're going to hit our routes.rb file. We verify that that's a valid route. It's passed on to, in this case, the demo controller. The Blarg action is found in that controller, and then the Blarg view is what's sent back to the web server, who then serves that up to the browser. So that's all that piece. And again, our config routes is key there. Any questions on that?
No, sir.
Man, where did the hour go?
Yeah, that was one of the most short hours.
I know. It just certainly feels that way. Let's see. I think we've done everything. The challenge stuff that he had, I think he said, create another controller. So let's just for kicks, let's do that. And so I'm gonna actually pause. If for those of you who might be following us at home, let's do it here. I'll give you some requirements, and then I'll give you a minute or two to see if you can fulfill those, and then we'll come back. We'll pause, and then we'll come back and do that. So I'm going to ask you to. So let's do challenge. Let's see. Create a jobs controller with 2 actions. Let's just say tech and tech and service. Modify the views for each action to include some relevant text based on the action's purpose. All right, so I'm asking you to create a jobs controller. The jobs controller will have 2 actions, tech and service. I mean, the idea, this is contrived, but the idea is, let's say this thing is serving up jobs or it's doing a job search. And so the 2 actions are going to be tech and services. So one action might handle tech jobs, the other might handle service jobs. And then modify the views for each one. You can just say something like this view serves up text, and then the other one say this view serves up service jobs. Okay. Greg, are we clear on those? Are we clear on those requirements? Any questions about those?
I don't have any questions about that.
Okay, so we're going to pause. And again, if you're following along at home, I'll give you 2 minutes. Let me set my timer, because if I don't, so I'm going to set my timer for 2 minutes, and then I'll come back in 2 minutes and we'll look at a solution for that.
Okay, thanks.
3, 2, 1. Ding. Okay. All righty. So, Greg, share with me your solution. You are on mute.
I was clicking the wrong button there to get off of mute. So, okay, let me share up what I got going on here. I'm going to share my screen.
Mm-hmm.
And all right, you can see what I got there. Okay, so let me okay, so here's the code.
So I'm
I've got
not
down
seeing, let me see, do I need to go back to full screen? I'm not seeing your screen. I'm seeing all black is all I'm seeing. Try sharing again.
Yeah.
I had it on my
Do you see
large
the
monitor, so maybe that was.
Are you seeing code?
No, I'm not. It's all black.
All right, so let me do this. You're seeing it now. I see the little green outline to it. Yeah.
Well, no, I'm not. I'm just seeing all. I'm just seeing a black screen. Try one more time. If not, you can just tell me what you did, because I'm going to do it on my. I'm going to do it on.
Yeah.
On my console.
Any luck there? Seeing it?
No.
Okay, so I'm using VS Code, and down in the bottom, one of the wonderful things there is that I split the screen. So I've got the server running in the background, as you had talked about last week. You know, it's nice to have a couple of terminal windows going. So I just got the server running. So I just Rails generate controller jobs space tech space service. So what I did was generated controller name.
So let's see. Why don't you stop sharing your screen, and I'll type that out just so folks can see it. And let's do that one. All righty. So tell me what you typed. Jobs, or no? Tell me what you typed.
Rails G controller jobs. And then it was, I think I did tech first and then service.
Tech and then right.
So it's
now,
name, right?
Yeah, just so we can see, what I'll do is I'll leave, let's say, just to prove to us that we can manually do these things too. I'll just create the tech, the tech action, and then we'll do service maybe after the fact. So I do that, and then we can see the stuff that it created for us there. And then, so we'll go to controllers, and we'll go to jobs controller, got tech, and then I can also manually go in here and do def services or service. That's always the thing in Rails, is trying to decide whether you want whether to use single or plural. And generally, see, it's not coming to right. I think generally controllers are singular, but anyway, but that can cause you actually a lot of grief. I mean, the other thing is, you know, for Rails models, it'll automatically do plural things for you. And what I'm thinking of is like person versus people, and it can really it can cause you some issues. So just be aware that that's a thing. In fact, there's a list of all words out there that Rails will pluralize for you, because that changes how you access things and the things that you do. So I'm going to manually create a service action here. And then the other thing we need to view, if you recall, is in our views, we've got our jobs view. We would need to. So I'm just going to go here is a quick way to maybe copy that CP apps view jobs tech, and we'll copy that to apps views jobs. We'll call it service.html.erb. And then that gives us both of our views. And I'm not done yet. What's the last thing I need to do? So by default, when I ran my command, I did Rails G controller jobs tech. And because I'm manually adding the jobs, there's one more thing I need to edit.
So in the route,
right, routes.rb.
Config routes.rb.
So routes.rb, I got jobs tech. I'll also need to do
you need to get jobs/service.
So I'll do service. And so that should be all the moving parts. And of course, the way to test this out now is to come run our server, Rails S. And I'll go. So I can go jobs tech. There's our tech, and I think I asked you to modify this text, but again, to modify that text, we would just go inside here and change that. So that's our jobs tech and our jobs service. Oh yeah, and the reason that says the same thing is because if you remember, I just copied files, so that's why it says jobs tech instead of the service says tech instead of service. And that's a good point. Generally, you do want to use the scaffolding and the generators to do stuff for you when you do have to do it after the fact. If you'll notice here, to add, all I would have had to do is add tech to the generator to get the extra action in the controller and then the extra view and also the extra route. But since I didn't do that, there's 3 files that I had to go in and modify, which is not the end of the world, but you can imagine a scenario where I've got this more sophisticated app, and we'll see this later on when we start to use scaffolding. When you have to go back and add it after the fact, it's not rocket science to do it, but there's usually multiple files that you have to touch. So certainly, as much as you can leverage the Rails framework to sort of set all those pieces up and set the wiring up so it all works together, because when you have to go back and recreate it on your own, again, it's not the end of the world, but it can certainly take some work to do. Okay, I'm going to honor our time. Any closing thoughts?
Thank you.
Any closing thoughts, comments, gripes, moans?
No, I appreciate it. Really
we'll come back
done.
Wednesday, and I'll come up with an exercise for us to do. And we are going to get started on the recruiter. What name did we decide we wanted to use?
Recruit Tracker.
Recruit Tracker. We will get started on Recruit Tracker. We should probably just do some requirements. Our inclination is going to be put hands on keyboard and let's go ahead and get an app out there and start doing some stuff. But we're going to resist that urge and actually build some requirements out first, and that way we're not composing it at the keyboard, and it'll pay dividends in the long run if we actually if we actually build some formal requirements out before we actually start to write code. All right.
Okay. All right. I'm excited.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
See ya.
See ya.